The hackerspaces.org website lists a number of design patterns for creating a new hackerspace. The first is infrastructure. This is the field of dreams approach. If you build it, they will come. We need to make some basic infrastructure investments and start the ball rolling. This is a model that has been successful in enough places that if we build it, they will come. The second design pattern is critical mass. We have that, but it seems to me that the potential of the Victoria community to support this kind of effort is still largely untapped. We've been moving forward looking for a very modest space that can be supported by a small handful of people. I think that broadening our reach could let us do something more interesting than that. But that's not to say that we're waiting. The small handful involved today is perfectly sufficient to get our house in order legally, find a place, and get to building things. We just have to keep growth in mind. So we finally come to the point where we can talk about projects and skills. Much of the discussion on the list so far has been about woodworking. It's an interesting basic skill that I'd love to see more people get into. I'm interested in projects that require some woodworking, but it's mostly a component of other projects rather than in itself for me these days. Home manufacturing is a burgeoning area. Personally, I have a MakerBot arriving next week. This is a 3D printer that lays down thin layers of plastic to create three-dimensional objects automatically from designs on the computer. Other folks have talked about plasma cutters, machining, and other metalworking projects. To me, this is one of the core benefits of such a space to the community. Other than home manufacturing hobbyists, when something breaks, you have to go back to the manufacturer to get it fixed. Often they don't do that. The lack of local manufacturing facilities is one of the things driving our disposable consumer culture. It seems paradoxical that to save an environment drowning in plastic, that the ability to make things out of plastic could be beneficial. But if that ability is put into local hands, we can fix things rather than throwing them away, and overall reduce waste. Computer and electronic hardware goes into the same area. Fixing things, creating new custom solutions. Some of the folks on the list have a lot of knowledge in these areas, and nice stockpiles of usable junk parts that we can build things with. Computer software is probably my strongest experience base, but it's the area that I'm least likely to just play around with things in. Perhaps it's the fact that as a computer science graduate student I spend all day on this stuff. A lot of folks in the discussion so far have very strong computer backgrounds, but I see this mostly as a tool set to be drawn upon rather than the focus of our projects. My real interest right now is DIY biology. In a community workshop kind of environment, I see this as taking several potential roles. The first is education. I mean, how many of us really know what our DNA looks like? Or what DNA in general looks like? Want to learn to extract it from a plant in an hour? How about the glow from a bioluminescent bacteria? But beyond that, there are becoming useful reasons to want to use biotechnologies. Do you want to know what pesticide residues are in your garden? There's a test for that. The kit would probably cost $50, more than I'd usually spend on it myself, but shared among a couple dozen it becomes cheap. And the lab skills to do those kinds of tests are easily taught. What about a DNA barcode of the fungal species in your garden? Or a random screen of the milk and cheese you buy for dangerous bacteria? As personal genomes become more common and targeted cures become possible, I'd like more control in my own hands rather than depending on drug companies to spend the many thousands of dollars needed for approvals on some new treatment. I don't want to be a cost-benefit ratio if I have a rare genetic variation. At the very least, I want the testing under my control. I have a small microfluidic blood uric acid meter to treat my levels to test my levels of uric acids and prevent a gout reoccurrence. At the doctor's, I can get tested once or twice to see where things lie, but my own meter allows me to tie that into the specific foods that I need to avoid. From the beer we brew to the bread we bake to the yogurt we eat, we already use microorganisms in numerous ways. We're about to enter an era where control over and selection of those organisms can be both powerful and protective. As fundamental a technology as microcircuitry was in the 70s, we'll see new modes of interacting with the biological world profoundly changing our lives. I'd like the knowledge and control over those powers to use them wisely rather than buying my solutions off the shelf. What am I missing? A million things, I'm sure. That's the point of having a local pool of technology talent. You don't have to know in advance what the project is. Tools are an interesting topic. There are several models for tool acquisitions. The most common is donated or loaned tools. Donated is easiest for a number of reasons, but I know I have many tools that I'd be willing to let someone use. way more than I'd want to give away. Even if I were giving it away to a central workshop, that I'd still have access to them through. Of course, some models, like the tech shop, have enough money to outright buy extensive sets of tools. But I don't see that as the most efficient or desirable model for us. Which means we have to deal with the complexity of loaned tools. But that's not a bad thing in some ways, because a loaned tool ensures that there is at least one person who knows how to use it. And if they make their tool checkout procedure transitive, then that knowledge can expand, and the tool owner will ensure that everyone that uses the tool has been checked out through their own protocol. Of course, the donation or semi-permanent loan of tools and materials could make the workshop into a junkyard. Loaned tools must be prepared to go home again if they have no current borrowers, with some exception for the difficult-to-move tools, of course. So the nutshell proposal here is that we maintain an online list of people who have tools that they wouldn't mind loaning, and a list of borrowers, and we negotiate a protocol for always having members responsible for those tools that are loaned. Back to the infrastructure design pattern. If you build it, they will come. But first we need to protect ourselves. That probably means forming a legal structure and getting insurance. Then there's space. We need to rent something, and we have some recommended characteristics from the design patterns on what we should rent. And then finally there's equipping the space. It all seems easy, but not cheap. We need to figure out where our sustainable income is coming from. Membership fees are the obvious source of income. At the same time, we don't want to price people out of the facilities. Certainly the tech shop level of fees are several times too expensive. Perhaps $25 or $30 a month? Maybe a bit more if the space is getting heavily used. And if it turns into a business of some sort, then it should be individually negotiated to make sure that individual use of a communal space isn't becoming problematic. Non-member access fees are a potential place to lessen our need for an onerous membership model. If a casual user needed some problem solved or some temporary access to the shop, then it should be affordably possible. It would certainly be a benefit of the People's Workspace if we were able to turn an open access model, rather than the strict membership model, into an outreach program. For instance, if someone really needed a web page built, and we had a model where the People's Workshop could have a rent-a-nerd program, rather than just the ability to come in and use the tools. I'd tend to help more rather than less if I knew the workshop was benefiting. Throw in a model of barter for services, and I'd certainly spend a Saturday afternoon helping with a potentially interesting problem to fulfill some of my work-share hours, particularly if the barter had part of it as a head of lettuce or a jar of pickles or something like that. This kind of model also broadens our reach and impact beyond just those who would pay a monthly membership fee. An Etsy-like technology shop should also be part of the model. As we find useful things to build that fill a need, those items are a potential revenue stream. We'd have to tie their production into the work-share hours somehow, but it seems like something that we could justify to make sure that we had cash inflow from an online store kind of presence. And the final question is classes and lectures and the like. Are they public relations or profit opportunity? Or both, of course, but we'll have to strike a balance. One thing that is not a revenue source is that DIY Victoria as an organization must have no interest in a share of any intellectual property. This is very much in contrast to the way things work in institutions. For instance, if you work at a university, they own about 20% of the idea on average, just for hosting the lab, and having the network of people around to help with getting the idea out, of course. If you develop in a corporation, of course, they own all of it. Besides being a brick in the edifice of a broken ownership system, this legal interest is burdensome to already tenuous startups. Garage businesses are garage businesses because they don't want to give up that interest except on their terms. We're looking to gather all the benefits of a research community without incurring the costs of an institution. And the only way that can happen is if DIY Victoria as an organization has no interest in any share of any intellectual property. So what's next? I think the next public event that I'm aware of is an Ignite event that I'm planning for late April or early May. This is a format that has been increasingly popular around the world and consists of 5-minute talks by a number of speakers. Go and Google Ignite talks and listen to some. Each speaker gets 5 minutes and has to provide 20 slides which are advanced at 15-second intervals. Then they hand the microphone on to the next speaker. It can be a story, a message, a biography, or whatever else strikes your passion. My co-organizer was planning it as a benefit for junior achievement, and we could use the reach to get more members to get the workshop off the ground. We also need to get the legal structures in place, find a space, figure out insurance, and figure out initial startup money. That's going to take a lot of work. So stay in touch on DIYvictoria.ca and keep talking on the Google group. Let's get projects going, excitement building, and create the People's Workshop. Thanks for listening. I hope to hear from you soon.